Chapter 4. The Wyatt case was high profile for Brighton's Crown Court. Passing through the metal detector at the main entrance, Leo felt the building's hushed anxiety. Climbing the marble stairs, he made a vain attempt to pat down his creased shirt before slipping silently into the crowded press gallery. Journalists, most of whom looked as though they'd come down from London for the day, readied themselves. Notes were made on courtroom ambience, as pens encased in gold and silver slid over pads bound in leather. It's not about the pen, Leo thought as he pulled a biro and a notepad from his dripping parka. It's about the words it writes. Wyatt had been charged with a brutal and complex bank robbery last year. 2 families had been kidnapped to get the code to a private bank vault very few people even knew existed. The robbers, of whom Wyatt was alleged to have been in charge, got away with a vast sum of money. That's where Wyatt's luck ended, however, being caught some weeks later at a rented cottage with £100,000 hidden under the bed. He claimed he had been asked to meet someone at the cottage to arrange the sale of a car and knew nothing at all about the robbery. Leo knew this because he'd spent hours last week researching the case in order to write a well-informed article. He'd investigated Wyatt, his background, the witnesses, the evidence, everything that the prosecutors were using to secure conviction. Considering it all, Leo couldn't help but think Wyatt was innocent. The defending counsel had alluded to Wyatt's low IQ, and the flamboyant questioning of the prosecutor often left him confused. The interesting part, to Leo at least, was that the bank had since left the premises in Brighton and gone to trade elsewhere. He had looked up their new address, but only a P.O. box and email address were given. Leo wondered whether anything else had been taken that evening, something private and sensitive that perhaps no one wanted to own up to. Certainly the initial estimates of money taken were vastly above the £100,000 recovered. "Are you ready to come and work for a proper paper?" whispered one of the men in front of Leo. "Yes, sir, so ready," replied the other. It took Leo a moment to recognise the voice, but when he did, it came with a rush of heat and tightness in his chest. "My place is a joke at the moment. No one has any clue what's going on." Looking up from his pad, Leo recognised the sandy, short-cropped hair of the Echo's so-called star journalist, Callum Martins. The other man, nodding in agreement, Leo recognised as the editor of their rival, The Voice. "The editor has no direction. They're just writing bullshit local stories. I need to work for some professionals," Callum said. "Circulation is falling, the place has no money, they've even started cutting pay." "We'll get it all tied up in the next couple of days. You've just got to do as we planned," the editor said, as the judge emerged and the courtroom stood. Leo didn't know what to do. He had to leave. He couldn't have Callum notice him, the piggish eyes, the fake grin. Leo's palms felt sweaty, his chest tight. Breathe deeply. Breathe deeply. Using the standing courtroom as a distraction, Leo darted for the door. What did the editor mean by "do as we planned"? Callum had been given so much trust over the last few months he could write about almost anything. Was he planning to embarrass the paper? Loyalty and pride bubbled through Leo's mind. Breathe deeply, his chest constricted further. He needed to get back in there, to hear the verdicts, to see what Martins was planning. Breathe deeply. Sloping back into the courtroom by another door, Leo stood at the back of the public gallery. He could see Callum and the editor on the other side of the room. "Over the last few days," the judge said, beginning to sum up the case, "we have heard many stories and allegations." Wyatt stood expressionless, his thick knuckles resting on the desk. The jury was called and shuffled in. A riot of sound in the tension of the silent room. 11 sat, 1 remained standing. "Have you reached your verdict?" A clock ticked, and somewhere at the back of the room someone coughed. "We have," said the head juror, a woman in her 50s. "How do you find the defendant?" They waited, an audible intake of breath. Unseen by the judge or the court officials, Callum held his phone. He kept it down low, just below the wooden barrier which penned in the poised journalists. The editor next to him nodded as a smile bred across his face. The phone was just high enough for the camera to see the head juror and the judge. Leo watched helplessly from the public gallery. His sense of panic rose. Recording inside the courtroom was tantamount to contempt of court. Callum could be arrested for that. If those images were published, the paper could be fined or even shut down. Breathe. Focus. We find the defendant. All ears listened, and one tiny camera recorded. There was nothing Leo could do. His fate was as sealed as Wyatt's. Guilty. A circus of activity followed. Journalists who, a moment ago, stood frozen in anticipation pushed to leave the room. Leo did the same. Pulling his phone from his pocket, he saw a notification. The Brighton Echo is now streaming live.